think we want to leave it like that so that we can see.
No, we want to there.
Ani Bosho and Dinaway
Hi.
Maganadok. Hello, everyone. Sorry, we're a few minutes late. This is our first time we're doing a live from our nonprofit page. We've reached over 100 followers. We've actually we have doubled our numbers since we made a post a few weeks ago saying, hey, we got to hit 100 in order to be able to go live. So we've done that. So yay, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
So we have to start with a disclaimer. So we've kind of been building up to this point of sharing an actual story, and this is going to be from our Uncle Francis. So do you want to start with maybe a little bit of like his first interview and then our second interview, and then we'll read his story? Or how do you want to do this?
I just want to get it over with.
Yes, it's tough. So we had taken Uncle Francis, and I know we talked about this maybe our second or third live, down to Holy Childhood. The church wanted to interview him, so we went ahead and we did that. Did not go as smoothly, I guess, or in an authentic way. The person doing the interview had no prior knowledge around Indigenous cultures or what happened in the boarding schools. And in his mind, he thought it was a good thing that he's coming in with not a biased opinion, right? But in the end, at the end of the interview, after my Uncle Francis shared all these horrific things that happened to him, he made the comment about, well, I know a lot of bad things happen, but can you think of one good thing that happened to you in the school? And that's when it hit us that was really what he was after. Like, even though the church set up these schools and our families had horrible experiences, they still want to see what good came from it, right? And we're not trying to say that when we say a good experience, it's like maybe they got some education out of it, maybe they furthered their education, whatever, but it doesn't take away the trauma that they, even if it might not have happened directly to them, they witnessed it, right? And the way they were talked to, the negligence, the lack of affection, all of those things, right? So a good experience isn't really good, just maybe better than some of them, right? Oh, my mom just commented she can't find her live. She's got to go on her page. Hopefully she finds us. Maybe we'll message her like, hey, go to our. So hopefully it looks like we have 4 viewers. So I know people are seeing it. So good. So after that interview, it just didn't really sit with us well. And we saw that the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition was doing interviews in Michigan, around the same area where Holy Child is located, but through the tribal offices that were down there. And so we knew that was going to be a much better interview in the sense that, oh, hi, Mom. It would be a better interview in that the people are specifically trained. They're all Indigenous people doing the interviews, from the camera people to the ones doing the intake. All of it was all Indigenous people. And they were going to be there to support him during and after, which was really important, right? And so we did that. And so my Uncle Francis bought this letter with him that he was going to read. And he ended up not doing it because he told bits and pieces of what we're going to read today. And the interview, by the way, has not gone live yet. They haven't posted it. That's why we haven't shared it with anyone. We don't have access to it yet. He ended up not reading the story, probably for a couple reasons. One, it was hard. And I think he started telling the story before they had the cameras turned on. And so that kind of threw him off a little bit, like, hey, I was just telling you a whole bunch of stuff and you didn't even have the cameras on. And they were really just trying to provide that space. It's known as an Indigenous pause, right? Where somebody's not talking, so you think you can interject and talk, right? But what that interview provided was that silence that maybe Uncle Francis wasn't used to, right? So he just started talking, and it was before the cameras were rolling. So he told a lot of what's on this paper off camera. And then when he realized they hadn't recorded it yet, and then he started talking, he didn't want to repeat it all. He had just been really vulnerable and shared a lot before the cameras even rolled. And what he really wanted to accomplish from the interview was, yes, bad things happened to me, but one of my friends didn't get home, find him, okay? So this is a disclaimer for all of those that are watching. Can you speak louder? Let me see, my volume is turned all the way up, Lois. Hopefully you can hear. Maybe check your computer settings too. I know some people have had to put like ear pods in so they can hear. I hope that helps. Mariah, yay, you're live from your page. For people turning in, you can click the 3 dots on the right of the screen.
Yay, thanks,
Turn on
Mariah.
notifications to be notified when they go live again.
Miigwech.
Awesome. Yes, miigwech. So,
I just wanted to
Yeah.
kind of pop in here too. So when I was listening to Uncle Francis's his last one, I felt like too he was like us. Just hurry up and get it done and over with. You know, like hurry up. I want to get it done. You could just kind of feel that anxiousness in him.
Yeah.
So I feel like that, and I haven't talked to him about that part of it yet. But I feel like just knowing him and listening to it, that it was more or less, let's just hurry up and get it done and over with. I want to get it out.
yeah. And it's tough, right? If you think about anybody who's been through any traumatic experience, nobody wants to keep rehashing it. Like we've said the story, like let's be done with it now. Let's forget about it in a sense, right?
Right.
We want to make sure these stories are never forgotten. If survivors are finally coming forward and sharing their stories, as hard as it is for us to hear it and process it and learn it and all of it things, we have to. I feel like it's our duty that we share that because it's a secret that they've kept their entire lives and we need to share it with the world. These
Right.
are stories you probably haven't heard before. So I have been reading this letter many, many, many times over the last week since I reached out to my Uncle Francis and he agreed to, I have a little, so I'll have to watch this later. Yes, please do. I read it a lot of times, or many times through, so I could try to disconnect from it a little bit because it's really tough, and I'm probably going to have to take breaks as we're reading this. Have your tissues on hand. This is the most vulnerable we've been with all of our lives, and it's very tough. So if you'd rather not hear this right now or hear it in sections, we completely understand if you can't watch right now and you want to come back later. Totally understandable, right? I will do my best to get through this letter. It is very tough, but here's the story that he wants the world to know. I also might pass it off to Penny at some point too, but he's like,
I was like praying all day today, like, I hope Christine reads this because, yeah.
okay.
I've never finished it.
Okay, so I'll just go ahead and start. So this is the letter that Uncle Francis typed up himself that he was going to read during the interview because he knew he wasn't going to be able to just come up and say it all. But in the end, he told a story on camera that he wanted to tell, and that's how it should be, right? All right, here we go. Michigan was home to the longest running one in the nation. He's talking about the boarding school. Located in the resort town of Harbor Springs in the northern Lower Peninsula, it didn't close until the 1980s. I think a lot of times when people hear about the Indian boarding schools, they think it's something that happened so long ago, the late 1980s, when these boarding schools closed, so not so long ago. Tribes say such boarding schools contributed to the genocide of Native Americans. Harbor Springs hosts summer homes for the wealthy. Well-manicured lawns line the view of the bay. Downtown is filled with shops and art and galleries and restaurants. At the end of Main Street is Holy Childhood of Jesus Catholic Church. The Native children who attended the boarding school linked to that church called it Unholy Childhood. I, Francis Downer McLeod, again I'm reading his letter with his permission, survived Holy Childhood. I was there from the records point from ages 5 to 9. Except for one single difference. I probably was just another kid, kind of small and black-haired and brown-eyed like all the other kids who attended Holy Childhood. There was only one thing different about me. I was a left-handed child. In the Catholic religion, the left hand was perceived as the devil's hand. There I was, a child under domination of religious zealots, who were absolutely and resolutely determined to rid themselves of such a presence. There appeared no barriers to whatever measures they might use. First, they used a plate of water, pressed my hand down into the water, then attached positive and negative on either side of the plate, and sent bursts of electricity into the water. Needless to say, I screamed. How often did they do this to my hand? I don't know. The best I can say is a number of times. Their next effort was when a lay brother brought a stick with a hole in it, fitted over my thumb, gave the stick a quick jerk, and broke my thumb, or fractured it, or twisted it out of alignment. Thinking back on it, his moves were very practiced, meaning he did it before. They jerked the thumb by ways of reminding me that using my left hand was a no-no. Today, my ring and little fingers are both tingly and numb from the electrical treatment. The thumb breaking was a kind of last resort thing. I understand that amputation would take place if I kept on resisting a changeover. As I already mentioned, the nuns and the priests, however, had yet another tactic to try first. My fellow students were told that whenever they were individually punished for this, that or others, my left hand, my devil's hand, was why. So, meaning if they were punished, it was his fault, right? Punches and kicks became part of my daily routine, and I met nearly every day with black eyes, a bloody nose, and frequently lay unconscious on the rec room floor for hours. I want to remind you all, he's about 7 years old when this happened, okay? I wasn't allowed to talk with my brothers and sisters. The nuns.
Sorry.
The mic, I have my mic all the way up,
Okay.
so hopefully people can see.
Okay. Go ahead.
Let's see. The nuns told me that none of them wanted to talk to me, a vile child who insisted on using his cursed hand in defiance of the church and of God. They said my oldest brother told them to do whatever they could to make me obey and change-handedness. I should mention that that was not true. He said that, he told my mom that he felt bad for not having a good relationship with her father, which is his brother, because that's what the priests were telling him, that your brothers say you deserve this, when his brother never said that to him. So he thought his brother abandoned him, and so he held that grudge for all these years. My sister saw me on the floor on one such occasion and rushed to help me up, whereupon a nun set on her pulling out a braided leather strap from her sleeve. On that occasion, my brother Tom rushed to the scene and punched the nun in the stomach. She fell over me. I'm not sure, but she yelled something that sounded like, "Effin' Indian bastards." It was so funny, I didn't mind her beating on me. Spit flying out of her mouth and great big eyes in her head, big as pool balls. And now I have to tell you of another young boy who was here at Holy Childhood with me. And if I didn't feel I owed him, it's unlikely I'd have told my own story. Why? Because there are so many stories like mine, some worse in fact. I owe a fellow student who showed me some friendship. His name was Arsenal, that's his last name. I think his first name was Jack, maybe Zach. Jack or Zach told me, if you die, the nuns and priests can't hurt you anymore. I'm like, really? How do you die? Arsenal wasn't sure. I was 8, and he might have been maybe a year older. He tried fending off some of the others from pounding on me a couple times. Jack said it happened if you got pounded on often enough, severely enough, or got sick enough. You had to get very sick. He said he heard sick kids die after making sick sounds. Maybe that was how. He'd seen kids who'd got sick, who were then carried off. Unconsciousness was as close as I could seem to get. Unconsciousness was a nothing state. In it, I got free of the nuns and the priests and my now hostile classmates. So, possibly, dying was just longer lasting unconsciousness. I had experience. Dying wasn't scary. Not dying was. As it happened, Jack or Zach Arsenal found out how it came about. I can't swear to all of it. I don't remember the date, the hour, the season outside, or even the reason that Arsenal and I were locked in the furnace room. I guess my offense was stubbornly using my left hand. It was tied to my chest at any rate. It was very dark in the furnace room, and the furnace made very loud sounds ever so often. I could barely see Jack, but I could see enough to tell he was weak. His face was thin, and there was drool hanging from the corner of his mouth. He was having trouble holding his head up. Arsenal shoved his bowl of porridge to me. I can't eat, he told me. I'm sick, Francis. I think I'm going to die. I was so hungry. I'd have eaten the asbestos wrapped around the pipes leading upstairs, so I wasn't about to turn down the extra porridge, even with a dab of Arsenal's vomit in it. I ate it by hand, my right hand, scooping it up and into my mouth. But I did ask him. He'd been friendly and protective to me. If I get sick, can I die too? How do you get sick? I don't know. It just happens, I guess, he said. I didn't think of calling anyone. Who was there to call, except those black-cowled demonesses and the brown robes? Suffer what you must, but never, ever summon one of them. You don't cry for help. There's only one help and one relief. A span of time went by, and Jack or Zach began making some strange sounds from inside him, like growls or choking. Are you dying? I asked him. He didn't answer. But in a few minutes, he stopped making sounds. I guess that's when Jack or Zach got lucky and died. I'm not sure, but if I had to guess, I'd say it was in the early morning hours when one of the brown robes came in, knelt over him, and then picked him up to take him where they put the lucky kids. He didn't even look at me. I remember that Jack had that wet noodle limp look, all over, draped across the lay brother's arms. How did I feel? Maybe a little pissed. Now there'd be no one between me and the black eyes, bloody nose episodes, and being punched out. The only epitaph Jack got, maybe the only gravestone, an ethereal one that exists only in my memory. And all I can do for him, to tell his story here, today, he's here now. I firmly believe it. Still at Holy Childhood, somewhere or nearby. I'm sorry, Jack. This is all I got. Just your story. I hope you make it home sometime. So these are stories we never knew. He's never told anyone before me and Penny. He's 91, and that means that he's kept these stories to himself all this time. He's never, what does he say? He's never been in a space or had that space provided to him where he was able to share. or feel like his story or the words would mean anything. And it's just, my grandma and grandpa were there at the same time as him. So if this is happening to him, you can just imagine what happened to everybody else. He's told us that he was going to get a beating no matter what. So might as well give him something to beat him for, right? That's what he said. And as he's looking at it, at least he got to go home. Some of the people didn't. And I know we mentioned this in a live before, that Canada is way ahead of the US as far as searching the grounds for kids that died in these boarding schools. The US has just begun, and you're not even hearing about any of this on the news. They're still doing searches. They're still looking. I think we heard a couple stories from Carlisle, right? The bodies are going back home, and repatriation efforts are being made. But what about those kids that are still on the grounds? In the beginning of the story, he talks about it's a touristy town, right? All the rich people come down there, and they got their fancy boats on the water, and there's a street. So on the map, we found a map, and I don't know, obviously it's an outdated one. It said there's a cemetery, right? So we went, and there's a road there. And what does that mean? They paved over them? Probably, because they didn't mark them. They didn't want other people to know that they had died there. They tell parents that, oh, they ran away. We don't know where they are, right? That's a story you hear. And from a lot of the schools, they ran away. We don't know where they are. No, I know where they are. They're buried there. When we had gone this summer, I took my uncle to that first interview, and we'd asked, where's the graveyard? Because we know kids died here, and the map shows there's a graveyard here. And he's like, oh, the bodies were moved up the hill, right? And I know we mentioned this, maybe our second or third live too. We went up there, and they're not there. What did the guy say?
It's a mass grave down over the hill with a bunch of crosses, and because we couldn't find them, we walked all over that cemetery, and what we did find was that one cross down at the bottom of the hill with no names, so we don't know. And that road was put in, and they found those bodies. And those bodies were what was moved to that cemetery, and we don't know where they were moved to that in that cemetery.
And only a couple, right?
Right, only a
What
couple.
did he say, like 5 or 6 maybe?
Right.
We know a lot more kids died at that school.
Right. It's so unnerving. The only thing, I think that gets us through, sometimes I think we go through like the grieving process, as we're reading and trying to understand and doing our research and stuff. And, but part of that grieving process is anger. How do you not get angry at a church for doing what they did to these children and to these families and to people? I mean, we're all God's people, right? And so I think I have the hardest time with that. And we watched Sugar Cane,
It just came out.
Yeah. So it just hit our area to where we could watch it. And that was really unnerving too. And, Canada may be ahead of us in finding all of this stuff, but it took 86 churches to burn down before they actually started to listen. Because it wasn't just like, hey, I think you need to go find, my family members, and I think they were buried in your Catholic cemetery or underneath the school or, whatever. And watching Sugar Cane and listening to people like Uncle Francis, they were throwing babies in the incinerator. And it's a very awful story. And if any one of you are on Ancestry, you kind of have an idea too about how the DNA works and, finding your lineage that way. And it's been very helpful to us in doing that. But in Sugar Cane, it talks about how one of those people were a product of the priest. So their lineage goes back to the father being their biological father, which tells me that that priest there raped one of those Indian girls. And now this family has to face that truth. So there's a lot more, that we have not found. And I'm sure there's going to be, there's going to be some things that we're never going to find. And that is disheartening. But at the same time, which is why we're doing these lives, to help educate and to help get the word out. So more people like us, can do digging too, because you're going to find stuff that we can't find, or that are not in, how they say you're in the right place at the right time, things like that. So we're going to share that stuff with you. And unfortunately, sometimes it's going to be that difficult. So thanks for reading that, because that was awful.
Like I said, I had to practice and like detach myself, if that makes sense, to like, I'm just going to read a story, right? And I'm not going to think about, this is my uncle, right? I'm just going to read a story. And I don't know if it was helpful or if it made it worse, honestly, I don't know.
Yeah.
And as far as like how do you process the anger when you're finding out that this happened to your family and what the churches did to us? And it's like, not only how do you process the anger, but how do you move on from that anger and not let it affect your everyday life, right? And I think it starts with understanding the government, the U.S. government policies that led to the boarding schools, right? And I know we've mentioned, and I feel like it's good to bring the things up that we've talked about already, so that they're not forgotten. And I think we understand it a little bit more the more we talk about things. So like, kill the Indian to save the man. That was General Pratt, or kill the Indian, to save the man, right? That was Governor Pratt's, not governor, lieutenant, I don't know what he was. Henry Pratt. He started the first boarding school in Carlisle. That was his policy of running the boarding schools. And because he was a general in the military, that's how the schools were run, in very military in style. And you can see that if you look up any of the boarding school records. You can look up Mount Pleasant and Holy Childhood. You see kids lined up in rows, right? And that's just kind of how they were structured. As part of the research that we're doing too, we are, I don't know, like people comment on our lives, or they comment on our personal pages about, find out this book and, look more into the ancestry and the history of what was happening during that time. So one of them is called The Place of the Pike. It's a history of the Bay Mills Indian community. And I'm just going to read one paragraph in it to kind of give you an idea of the mindset during that time of the boarding school. So they're specifically talking about Bay Mills Indian community. They're Anishinaabe, just like Sault Ste. Marie. We're right up in the same area together, right? We were all one huge Anishinaabe family before bands and stuff were separated and all that stuff. But so it says in this book on page 40, it says that in a final effort to stamp out Native language and to suppress Anishinaabe traditions, the government decided that a boarding school system, which would remove Indian children from the immediate influence of their parents, would better accomplish this purpose. The Mount Pleasant Indian School opened in 1889, and many Anishinaabe students were sent south to attend. So I know we had talked about the boarding school records that we got down in the Chicago archives says Mount Pleasant. And I know like our grandparents and our cousins on that side, grandma and grandpa's side, didn't attend Mount Pleasant, but they were doing the intake because Mount Pleasant, this is like the 1930s, was in the process of shutting down. And so they were doing a lot of the intake with the social workers, and then they actually went to Holy Childhood. So what we got in the archives is just like that correspondence and like the transitioning. I think they were sent to like an off reservation school. It wasn't even like Holy Childhood, the records that we were reading. It was just like the off reservation schools to try to get them in the process of going to Holy Childhood. So we still are missing a huge chunk of time of what happened at Holy Childhood, other than this letter from Uncle Francis and the stories that we've heard from Grandma and Aunt Lil. The very few stories that we've heard, we don't have those records. I know they have pictures. There's pictures in Carlisle, and that started way before Mount Pleasant and Holy Childhood did. So where are those photographs? Where are their records? What happened in that school? And when we took Uncle Francis there was a lady that was sitting at the table, I want to guess maybe 60s or 70s. And she was saying, I had a good experience there. Like, I got a good education, I had friends. She got to go home on the weekends. So I'm guessing she probably lived closer to Holy Childhood. And they had like students who stayed like all year for several years. And then they had what's called day boarders. So they would just come to the school during the day and then they were able to go home. So there really wasn't as huge of a loss of the culture. But again, I still go back to a good experience just means that maybe they weren't punished, but you can't tell me they didn't see the things happening in these schools.
Right.
And a lot of times, even if you think about our own childhoods, right, there's things we block out. We don't want to remember those things. And I think that same thing happened with that person that was in the room that said, I had a decent experience. I had a good education. I went on to college. I guess that's a good experience. But again, what about the kids that had to stay there all year? They weren't hugged. They weren't loved. They weren't told they had a purpose. They weren't told that they were ever going to amount to anything, right? Just like get as much of the Indian out of them as possible and send them back home. Where now they're going to really feel disconnected because they don't know the language and they don't know the culture and they don't know how to connect. They don't know anything anymore, right?
Right.
And that's why there's still to this day the highest per capita, whatever, that's in the Army today is Native Americans. And if you think about the military style that these schools were built upon, it was an easy transition, right? For them to go just right into the military where it's that strict structure and you get up at this time and you make your bed and you do your chores. It was a really easy transition rather than trying to go home and fit into what was left of your culture or surrounded by non-Indigenous people who still had that evil mindset about natives, right? We're savage. We don't, we have our own spirituality. Keep in mind too, 1978 was when the Religious Freedom Act was passed. So before that, anyone practicing their tribal beliefs could be punished. Or some of it was seen as witchcraft,
Right.
because it wasn't Christianity.
Right.
So there's a lot of government policies that we got to understand too, right?
So if you think, you said 1978.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's a long time ago. That's almost as old as I am. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so I'm thinking, boy, I'm going to be 50 in a month. And so 50 years have passed and we still don't have the freedom, to do that. And what I mean by that is that I was just doing some research recently, and in the 2020 census, there were 9.7, now I might be off a little bit, but like 9.7 people that identified as American Indian, or
9.7 million
9.7 million. So
in the 2020 census?
in the 2020 census. So I have it written here too. So it's 1.6 million. So of that, 1.6 million identify as Cherokee Indian. So now remember that 9.7 million identify as Indian in 2020, which is an astronomical number in comparison to 2010, which I believe was under 1 million. So, I mean, people are really starting to come up, but still, that's a 10-year span, right? 1.6 million identify as Cherokee Indian in some form, as there are 3 federally recognized Cherokee tribes, okay? So of that, only less than 500,000 of them are enrolled in the Cherokee Nation. That's a huge difference. So, and there's so many roadblocks that prevent that from happening, so many different things. So, you said the 1978 freedom of religion, that's one of them, right? They're getting their ground or trying to understand it, right? There's the treaties that began from the beginning of time, that the white man stepped on our land. So all those treaties and all that trickery that they did with the Indians, at that time, and still do to this day, you know, and why we have reservations and why we have tribes and bands and everything. We didn't create that. That was all created by the United States. So there's a lot of roadblocks. There's a lot of you can't do this kind of thing. So a lot of us don't have the freedom to express our way of life and to get into it and to understand it, because it's not easy. It's not as easy as picking up a King James Bible and reading, or, you know, going to a Lutheran church. It's not like that. It's so very different. We have to spend time and money and just an astronomical amount of time just to gain an understanding. I mean, when I first learned what Anishinaabe meant, I was like, oh, that's cool. Ooh, Anishinaabe Moan. Ooh, it's our language. You know what I mean? Like, so, but that took me months to do that. And I am like dedicated to researching, as you know, both Christine and I are. So it's just super frustrating. And I know I can get on a tangent with that, and I apologize for that, but it's just, it trickles down to generation to generation to generation. I mean, the school opened in 1889, and we're still feeling the effects of that and what they did to our families. You know, it's super frustrating.
Kate's asking, what's a band? I guess the best way to describe it is like, so in Wisconsin, there's 6 different bands of Anishinaabe, or Chippewa, it's the same thing. And so I guess the best way to describe is like the villages, or like their reservation lands, or where they're located, are the different bands. So like Anishinaabe is like the nation, right? And there's, I don't know how many bands in Michigan of different Chippewa nations. And there's bands go into Wisconsin. So Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and into the Dakotas too. And also Canada. So it's like the huge group of Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Ojibwe, whatever you want to call them. Anishinaabe is the word we use. And so the bands are like where they're located, the villages, I guess you could say. That's the best way to kind of describe it. Because like Bay Mills and Sault Ste. Marie, like our families are all connected. So like part of our family is Bay Mills and part of it is Sioux tribe, but we're all the same people. It's kind of hard to describe how that works out. But, you know, and then as far as like when Penny says we don't have that freedom to practice our spirituality and beliefs, if you think about how blood quantum plays into that too, and that's, we could talk for months and years about blood quantum, and we're still never going to get a really good picture of what that all means. But it was a government imposed policy. And in my mind, it was a way to erase Native people, right? Because if you have to have both parents enrolled in order to be considered 100%, which I must also add, we are the only race of people that have to prove our blood quantum, right? No other race has to prove how much they are. Like if you say you're Asian, you don't have to say how much, what your percentage is. That's just your ethnicity, right? Native American, Indigenous people, we have to prove by blood quantum how much we are. And
the government has a scale to help you figure that out. So if you go onto what the American or the Indian Bureau, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they have, you'll have to do a little bit of searching, but you can find it. It'll tell you how to calculate how much Indian you are. And if you're a single mom, and the father, you don't know what the father is, you're then considered half. Like, it's
or if you're a different tribe, right?
It's crazy.
And then you can only choose one tribe. You can't be both. So let's say your mom is half Oneida and your dad is half Ojibwe, right? And now you're only a quarter. Well, what if the blood quantum is for that nation? You have to be a half. So now you're just not Native at all.
Yeah.
Because you don't follow the blood quantum requirements, even though you've lived with your Native people your entire life, and what that does to your identity.
Right. And that's when you talk about the imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
How we feel like sometimes we don't feel Indian at all. What does Indian actually feel like? What, am I supposed to, when we go to the reservations and we go see family up in Michigan, I kind of feel like maybe I should be speaking Ojibwe, you know, or I should somehow know the ceremonies. And, you know, when they did the repatriation, I was like, I felt like a left heel, you know, not even understanding that this was a good thing. What was happening was a good thing. And the ceremony that surrounded it, I didn't understand it. I played a part in it, but I didn't understand it. And now it's up to me to do some research and figure that out. And that is the frustrating piece, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, we can go on
Yeah.
and on.
And we will, as we do our lives and get more into this and get more established, we are going to start delving deeper into some of these government policies and how it affected us in the past, how it still affects us today. We'll talk about intergenerational trauma. We'll talk about all those things. We're kind of slowly building up to this. Like, there's no way we could have read Uncle Francis's letter, our very first live, and like shocked everybody. I feel like we wouldn't get any followers because they'd be like, I don't want to hear any of that. I don't want to know about it. I just don't want to, I can't. You disconnect from it. It didn't happen, right? There's like these cycles, and I'll talk about this maybe in our next one or the one after that. In this class that I took with Dr. Lisa Poupart, that talks about the cycles we go through as Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people working towards being allies, right? Of processing things that we didn't grow up learning, right? So like you go through guilt, and then you go through anger, and then you go through acceptance. You go through all these different things, but it's a cycle. It's not a continuum. It's not linear, right? I think a lot of the colonial ways we live in now, it's like there's a linear path we must all follow, right? Like you're 18 and you're independent, and then you get married, and then you have kids, and then you buy a house, and you do all these things, right? There's a path, a linear path. And if for some reason you fall off that path, or you don't follow the way society thinks you should, all of a sudden you feel like a failure, right? Everything in life is circular. We're all going to go through different emotions at different times, and it's not a setback. It's just part of the process. And I think changing that mindset helps you see your connectedness to everything in this world, right? And that's why, you know, when we think about how much of the language and culture has been lost, it's that culture is what is the huge part of it too. Because like if we would have grown up with these strong beliefs, and we would have taught these to our kids, right? We wouldn't have felt as lost growing up, and our identity and who we are. Our kids wouldn't struggle as adults with finding their gifts and their purpose in life and all of these things, right? There wouldn't be that struggle because you'd be so connected. There would be no question in your mind who you are, where you belong, what your path in life is. There's no set path, right? I mean, cripes, I'm 50, and I was a daycare teacher, and then I was a Head Start teacher, and then I was in Title VI, and then I went to school, and I quit work altogether, right? I'm a grad assistant, and it's like I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, right? But I don't ever look at life that I'm failing. I'm taking the steps that I feel I need to take in that moment. And if more of us could do that, instead of looking at, oh, I failed, right? I didn't do what I was supposed to do at this age. I had kids out of wedlock, whatever. Who cares? We have to stop comparing. It's killing us as a people, as human beings. It's killing us, this comparison thing to measure up to what everybody else is doing or how they're doing things, right? It's a vicious cycle. So,
yeah. Did you share that book there?
Oh, yes. So one other book.
This is actually quite interesting because the book that she's going to share is the bishop that was in Holy Childhood. So when we were in Gaylord, I took a bunch of pictures, and I'll post them to this video. I tried posting them while we were on live, and I can't do it. So when we're done, I'll post a bunch of pictures that we took while we were there. And there is one of Father Bishop, or
Bishop Frederick Berga.
Yeah. So, and he has a bunch of writings in there, as well as a log cabin that he stayed in while he was at the school. So it's really interesting that Christine was able to find this book, which wasn't very easy to find.
No, I actually had borrowed it from the UWGB library back in like August, September. And they're like, oh, it's due back in January. I'm like, January? I don't need that long. I've only read a few pages here and there because like school gets away with you, work gets away with you, life gets away, right?
Mhm.
So I went online yesterday to try to find the book, and it's out of print everywhere. Even like thrift books where I order a lot of used books and stuff from, out of stock. I found one on eBay. I don't know if there's any more. It wasn't cheap, but I needed to have a copy of it because there's so much in here that talks about the time in Holy Childhood and Mount Pleasant and his
It's kind of like a
missions
diary,
throughout.
right?
Yes, it is. It's called the Diary
Oh.
of Bishop Frederick Berga. Yeah,
Okay.
and it has his notes of interactions with the Indian people in the Michigan area where all our family grew up. And there's a lot of names in here that are in our family. So I'm like, we need this book. Like we're doing so much research. Like y'all don't even know what we're doing behind the scenes and how much work Penny is doing on Ancestry with all of that. And it's like, we'll find a name in this book, or we'll find a name in that, what is that big one, that Durant Field Notes books,
Yep.
right? All these little paper clips in here of all our family members, right? And then another thing that we're finding too is their actual indigenous names. So
Yeah.
maybe we can get Mom on our live next time so she can share our grandma's side. So the Joseph side, they all had indigenous names when they went into the boarding school. I know I mentioned it before. Tabishko Gijik was one of them, one of grandma's siblings. And I think her dad had that name too. And we're still trying to figure out, like, was it a surname? Was it like, I know there's deeper meanings behind those words too. So was it like, I don't know. We're still trying to figure out the ties to all of that because there's more than one Tabishko Gijik. But in general, if somebody else has that name, nobody else does in that same, I don't know, age
Clan
range or
whatever.
So we're still trying to find all that out.
Yeah.
And that's part of the struggle we're having with getting records is like these Durant Field Notes. Sometimes it's the Ojibwe name, but the birth dates and where they're located, we're just like, okay, that's this person. So we're making a lot of connections that way too. It's a lot of work, and we're doing a lot of behind the scenes things. And
Yeah, and
Yeah.
studying the US Census is just a whole nother thing in of itself. It's super frustrating.
you'll see a dark Native person, right? And it says their ethnicity is white. Obviously, it's not, but it wasn't a good time to be Indian, so you're not about to admit it, right? And a lot of Native people too married white people. Nothing against white people. This is part of our identity too, right? We're both 50% Native, Anishinaabe, 50% white. So when I say white, I'm not saying this like, to belittle anybody else or anything like that.
Right.
We're white too. I forgot where I was going with that story now. Oh yeah, so they intermarried, with non-native people because if their kids were lighter skinned like we are, they wouldn't be taken to the boarding schools. It was more the ones that were taken away forcefully were the ones that looked native, right? And so sometimes that was a mask to hide that. And we've even seen through the work that we're doing, there's people who didn't even know that they were native at all because their family never admitted to it. They didn't want to be identified. They didn't want their kids to chance to go through the schools and things that they had gone through, right? So they would just be like, oh, we're white.
Right.
And the census would just mark it down. Oh, that's what they said they are. That's what they are then, right?
Right.
There's no question about it.
Right.
There's no question on your name. They wrote down whatever you told them.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so in the future, Christine had touched on a little bit about, what we'll be talking about in the future. So just a little, we'll probably start in the 1700s. We'll start with, that area, when the census started, why it existed, how they went about it, when the U.S. Marshals took the census, because they actually did the census for the Indians. So there's a lot of different things. So then we'll talk about assimilation, reorganization, those different things and how they led up to the boarding schools. I think the boarding schools was a last ditch effort in trying to get rid of the Indians, but then I think everything circles back and starts all over again in one way or another. So we'll talk about those things. If there's anything that you guys want to if you've delved into this a little bit and have a different understanding of some things and want us to do some research and talk about it, make sure you leave your comments and we'll definitely do that.
Yeah, Kate's saying, I wonder how many people are doing those at-home DNA tests and learning that they're native. Okay, so we have a love-hate relationship with these DNA tests, okay? The reason being is people are saying that they're really accurate and it gives you a really good picture of where you're from and where everything else, right? We know from personal experience and doing our ancestry work, they're not accurate, okay? So just because the DNA tests come back and all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm Native or I'm all these things, doesn't really mean that. You can't go by that 100%. You just can't. If you do your ancestry work and you find a Native chief or you find your connection to a tribal nation, that's different. And maybe doing a DNA test will give you some clues into maybe finding some of that work, but it's not a guaranteed, oh, yep, it says I'm, 30% this, so I'm Native. That's not how that works.
Yeah, and really
you
what
got
it
to
is,
trace yourself to the tribe, right?
yeah, so it's like they give you a percentage of indigenous, so you're indigenous people. And that's what they say that you are. So then when you start tracing your ancestors, they give you an idea of where your indigenous ancestry came from. So that was super helpful because we were able to, go to those areas and really dig into to research and do that. So that's where the DNA really helped us and do that. And then it also split, paternal and maternal. That was super helpful too, to see where, because the paternal side of our family is French Canadian, still Indian, but French Canadian, and then the other one is not. So it was helpful in, finding that line. So yeah, it's super helpful, but it's not, if you will. You know what I mean? Depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I would really be curious as to, really what the number would be on how many people actually identified as Indian and or didn't identify as Indian and then found some indigenous and then were able to prove it. So I would be curious to learn that for sure.
All right, so we're creeping up on an hour here. We try to keep our lives between 45 minutes, no more than an hour, just so we don't lose people. So I know we try to end with a quote. I didn't print one off again today, but I think we've just been kind of talking about this a little bit throughout our live to just like follow your own path in life. Don't go by what everybody thinks you should be doing in the timeline that they think you should be doing it. Get out in nature. Let that be your guide of what you should be doing. I know it sounds so like, I don't know what it sounds like, but like just be in the stillness and enjoy life and enjoy nature and your connectedness to everything and follow your own path.
Yeah.
Don't do what everybody thinks you should be doing.
Yeah, and
do what you feel is best for you.
For real. And be kind.
Yes, please.
Be kind. We're all people. If there's one thing that we've learned through this whole process is we're all people.
Mariah, touch some grass. For real.
Yeah, touch some grass.
Like take off your shoes. Maybe not so much in the winter, but maybe if you like the cold, go ahead and do that too, right? When you're stuck in concrete, like there's scientific data that shows our deconnection or I don't know what you want to call it. Like, I don't know.
Like a decompression?
I don't know what it is. But like when you're on concrete all day long and you're losing that, like the earth is a natural shock absorber. You need to be walking on the earth. Like Mariah says, touch some grass, like literally connect to the earth. The thing that takes care of us all, right?
Oh, yeah.
The earth is the reason why we're all alive today. Without it, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
The earth can survive without us, but we can't survive without the earth, right? So, all right, we are going to add miigwech.